Good evening, everyone. Again, thank you for joining us. Those who will come back and view tonight's workshop, if you will, a little bit later. And so I'm glad that you all are with us. Again, this is the intellectual committee here at Morgan. And so we're excited all about being able to bring Dr. Watson. And so, as you know, last week he was scheduled, but he was called to an emergency meeting. And so we are thankful again that Dr. Vista stepped right on in and presented. And so Dr. Watson was like, but I can come on Wednesday. So I'm all excited that he is here with us tonight. And I'm not going to belabor the time, but I want to just give you a little information about him. Dr. Jamal Watson is a professor of journalism and communications and director of the graduate program in strategic communication and public relations at Trinity Washington University. He's a longtime reporter and editor. So he served for many years as executive director of diverse issues in higher education and continues as the publications editor at large. He's a graduate of Georgetown University, and so Dr. Watson earned a master's degree in journalism from Columbia University and a master's degree and PhD in Afro-American Studies from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. An expert in the civil rights movement and media, Dr. Watson has received numerous awards, and so I'm just excited to know him and call him friend. And so, Dr. Watson, I just want to, again, we thank you for being here with us tonight. And I know you have a flight to catch in the morning, really early. And so, but I'm still thankful that you were able to come online with us. If you would just start off with just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came into the field of journalism and then becoming the executive director of diverse issues in higher education.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Dr. Jimenez, for the introduction and for the invitation to be here. So excited to talk with your students about really how to think about publishing, how to think about getting your work produced and in front of people who really matter, whether that's policymakers, whether that's other thought leaders. Oftentimes we write and we're writing to a very kind of small community, but our research and our work really extends beyond that community to really impact the masses. But the masses don't really read our work. And so one of the things that we have to do, I think, as scholars is to make our work more accessible to the public. And that's something that's not always taught in graduate school. It's not always taught in the academy, but how do you take your research, which is really important, and make it accessible? So I'd like to talk a little bit about that. But to your question, I grew up in Philadelphia, and I knew that I wanted to be a journalist since I was, 9 or 10, because someone at my church told me that journalists were nosy people, and journalism was a form of justified nosiness, is how she put it. And so I thought, wow, this is great. You can get paid for being nosy. And so that was really the entry point for me. And then when I went off to college, I went to Georgetown as an undergrad. I then became the first Black editor of my college newspaper, which had been founded in 1929. And they had not had a Black as the top editor. And so then when I left college, I secured a job and I was in Baltimore, it's Morgan State University, but I worked as a reporter at the Baltimore Sun. And so I covered, I lived in near Johns Hopkins University, and I covered a variety of stories, mostly about police, and of course in the early 1990s, and I don't know how it is in Baltimore now, but in the early 1990s it was a pretty tough place in terms of crime. And so I covered that, and then eventually moved to Howard County and wrote about development and issues in Columbia and Elk Ridge and Ellicott City, and then ended my career at the Baltimore Sun writing about the NAACP, which of course is headquartered there in Baltimore. And then I moved from there and then worked for a number of other publications, the Boston Globe, just a variety of other publications, and then decided that after having gone to Columbia that I wanted to go get a PhD. And so I went to University of Massachusetts Amherst, got a PhD in African American Studies, and my focus was always still media. My focus, my dissertation I wrote on a woman named Ethel Payne, who most people probably have never heard of, but Ethel Payne arguably was one of the most important Black journalists of the civil rights era. She was one of the few Black reporters who covered the White House at a time when, of course, it was very, very difficult for Blacks to gain admission into covering the White House. And she was just a powerful woman. She wrote for a newspaper in Chicago called the Chicago Defender, which was a Black newspaper. And so I use Ethel Payne and her journey as a way of looking at how the Black press covered the civil rights movement compared to the mainstream media. And the realities were quite stark when you think about it. I mean, and again, even if you think about it today, if I were to ask you, tell me a Black publication, you'd be really hard pressed to think of one. I mean, of course, there's the Afro American, and they're in Baltimore, but there's very, very few Black publications. There are very, very few Black outlets. Someone in my class said to me the other night, "Oh, BET." No, BET is not a Black outlet. It's not owned by Black people. It used to be, right? You had Bob Johnson, but then he sold it to Viacom. So Black ownership becomes really, really important. And we have very, very few of those that exist. We used to have Ebony, we used to have Jet. Those are all not owned really. They're not in Black hands anymore. I mean, Essence Magazine was sold to Time Warner. Now it's back in Black hands. But again, that's a problem in terms of our field. So I knew that when I graduated from my PhD program, I wanted to teach, but I also wanted to stay in journalism because that was my early training. And so I eventually became a staff writer. Then I became a managing editor. Then I became the executive editor of Diverse Issues in Higher Education. And Diverse had been formed in 1984 as a Black-owned publication. And its name was Black Issues in Higher Education. And most people who grew up in the 80s and the 90s remember Black Issues in Higher Education, because if you wanted a job, you would go in higher ed, you would go to Black Issues in Higher Education to find out where all the advertisements were. If you wanted to read about what Black students was doing, you'd go to Black Issues in Higher Education. In fact, when you think about some of the more prominent Black intellectuals and thinkers, they credit Black Issues in Higher Education with helping them to get their first job or helping them to kind of nurture and develop. So Black Issues in Higher Education has been around since 1984. And then in 2005, we changed our name from Black Issues to Diverse Issues. And people always say to me, "Why did you all do that?" And we did it for two reasons. One, we realized that some of the issues that Black faculty and Black students were facing was not particular just to Black people. We saw that the Hispanic community in higher ed, first generation students were also, and faculty were facing some challenges. So we wanted to expand our notion of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But also, quite frankly, we did it because of the advertising dollars, right? Because if you all remember the attacks on affirmative action, and you had many, many institutions saying, we will not be able to advertise with publications that are just exclusively focused on one community. So we said, okay, we figure out how to do this thing. We just broaden our vision and our mission. We still go write about Black people, but we also want to include other groups as part of the mix. And quite frankly, we found that there was interest in doing that. It actually gave us a whole new readership because people realized, like, okay, I'm interested in equity and I'm interested in inclusion. And those are not necessarily just Black issues, right? So we just kind of broadened. And we also got a huge international audience because people overseas started reading us saying, okay, I want to know about issues around access and opportunity, particularly students who were coming over here to study at the graduate level. So I became the editor of that publication, and it was a wonderful opportunity to run the publication during my tenure. We, of course, interviewed everyone from the Secretary of Education to President Obama when he was in office, and had a chance to talk with all of these individuals about their views on higher education, and it was just a wonderful tenure. And so when I decided that it was time, after having taught part-time, to now return to the classroom full-time, I then transitioned out of the top role, and I tried to transition, to be honest with you, out of the whole publication and just say it's time for me to go and teach. But the publishers of the publication said, no, you can't do that. We still want you to stay involved. So I have this role now as editor-at-large, which is great because I get a chance to actually do more writing. I do some podcasts. I get a chance to help mentor our younger writers who are looking to develop in the field of journalism and cover higher education. As you know, covering higher ed is different from covering anything else because academics are, of course, notoriously picky because that's what we do, right? We pick over everything that we, and so, if you have a comment in the wrong place, they'll call you up and tell you, you can. And so there's a level of scrutiny in higher ed that is very, very different. How we are very particular about even, naming people appropriately, right? So, in other publications, if someone has a terminal degree, you don't reference that. You just call them, Joe Smith, and then afterwards is Smith. But we are very intentional and diverse about giving respect to people who have and earn their earned degree. And so if you have a PhD, we call you doctor because we're EDD because you're a doctor. I mean, it's just important for us. And people are like, why do you do that? And again, it comes out of a tradition, a Black tradition. And you all know this because you're at Morgan. It comes out of a tradition of respect. And it comes out of a tradition that we, again, recognize the hard work that people put into earning their degree. So we're very, very particular about that. But we've been around now almost for 40 years, and we're still covering the issues of the day. And of course, the goal is how, at a time when journalism is shifting, right? Because we're a magazine and we're digital. People aren't reading magazines. They're not reading newspapers in the way that they used to. So as that's shifting, we're spending much more money and resources on how to beef up our digital side. So again, one of the things I'm hopeful that will come out of this conversation is for those of you in here who are interested in getting published, I can certainly help you to navigate a piece, that will showcase your work, but again, for a general audience, not just for, a classroom kind of exercise. So I hope we can talk about that.
Oh, of course. I mean, the platform is yours.
Yeah.
So most definitely. So I have a lot of questions because like last week, for example, we had a few students who were online and asked Dr. Bista about how to become editors and reviewers of journals. So what are some of your recommendations to getting started with that?
So again, one of the things I always remind people is that our publication is not an academic journal, which is great because again, academic journals, there's a level of scrutiny there that, as you all know, in terms of peer review and all of that, none of that is really required for our publication. I mean, the key is, do you have a good idea? And then I always tell people, how do you synthesize your good idea into a soundbite, right? We often learn about elevator speeches and how to do that, right? How do you take this idea in your head and synthesize it? Because number one, we know people are not reading in the way that they used to, right? Someone sent me an article the other day that was 3,000 words. I said, listen, I'm not reading this 3,000 word piece. And it's not because it's not interesting. It's just because we don't have time. We're just so busy, right? We're just busy people. And so when we got finished with that piece, we cut about half of it down to about 1,500, which is still kind of long, but it's better. And so sometimes the things I always teach my students is, how can we say more with less, right? How can we make an impact and so words matter, right? The kind of usage that we engage in matters. And so One of the things I would encourage you is one, just get an idea. What is the idea? And then you have the idea, and the next question is, okay, well, how do I get it to print, right? And the key is that blindly sending your idea out to an editor probably won't get much traction, right? Because again, editors, they receive dozens and dozens of emails. So the question becomes, what brings your email to the top, right? And the key is really that subject line. And of course, in that email, a very short paragraph. This is what my essay is about. This is what my op-ed is about. This is why I think it should be published. The mistake that I think too many people make is they write these long emails and nobody's going to read it. You just hit delete. And so one of the things I want to encourage you is to be very concise in your pitch. Right? As you're pitching an idea to an editor, because you want to get published, right? Because the reason for you being published is that you can then add this to your portfolio. So that as you're going out into the job market, or even as you're pursuing further education, you can be able to say, I've been published in these outlets. And so the key is you want to get published. And so I would say to keep your pitch very, very concise. And then the key is to think about what is the right publication for your piece, right? And so again, if you're writing about equity and diversity, again, you want to pitch it to diverse issues in higher education. You might want to pitch it to an insight into diversity, which is another publication. You got to think about the audience. Sending it to Forbes magazine is probably not a good idea. So you've got to think about, again, who's the audience, and again, why would they be interested in your piece? And then you also have to, what I always tell people, review the literature. You all know this, right? Who's written on this piece? Why is your piece so significant and different from what Sean Harper from USC wrote about last week, or Pedro Noguera wrote about? If you're writing about, hip hop in education, how is that different from what Mark Lamont Hill at Temple University wrote about? So you got to understand the landscape. And I think it's important to add new voices to the conversation, but you got to at least know who's kind of been writing about this stuff. And particularly you can cite them for sure. But again, I think you want to know the lay of the land. So again, you got to think about the audience, you got to think about the publication. And then the most important is, again, the length. Most op-ed pieces should be between 800, 1,000 words at the max. Again, after 1,000 words, you start getting into really tricky terrain. People just don't read it. So again, 800 to 1,000 words. Then your piece is published. Okay, so what? How do you then promote it? And that's where, again, social media becomes our best friend. I don't know how many of you in here are on Twitter. Anybody on Twitter here? Yeah, one person, right? So people always say, well, what is your brand, right? Your brand should be, how do you promote your work? And so again, I always tell people, you write a piece, it gets in the publication, you send that out, but you want to also tag the publication, because you want the publication to then retweet it out as well. And then perhaps tag other people, because then, whether that is Freeman Rabowski at UMBC, like people, well, although he doesn't have Twitter, so you can't tag him, but other people who are prominent thought leaders. I mean, David Wilson at Morgan has an actual big following as well on social media. So you want to tag people who can then help you get your article out. And that's what people sometimes forget to do. They write a great piece, and then it just sits out there and they don't have many eyeballs on it. So really, that's the process from start to beginning in terms of how to get a piece published. And I think there are a lot of outlets that would welcome the voices of students, particularly because students are often left out of the conversations around issues that have taken form in education, right? We often look to faculty members, but students are often left out. And so to have a student writing a piece and contributing to the conversation, I think is really, really important. So I would recommend that you all think about writing an op-ed piece, and then getting the piece published in an outlet.
That's some good information, Dr.
But the
Watson.
other thing I would add is if your piece gets rejected,
Yeah.
I think it's also really important to ask for some feedback, right, from the editor in terms of, well, why didn't this make it, or what are some of the things that I can do to enhance my piece for the next. I mean, you'll get rejections, right? I mean, that's just par for the. I mean, that just comes, right? You'll have. When I was the editor, I used to write to people all the time and say, "Thank you, no, but no, thank you, I'll pass." And but the thing is, if they called me or if they emailed me and said, "Well, why did you reject my piece?" I would actually take time to tell them. Most people didn't, because most people didn't learn that that was really an important step to do. But I think giving that feedback is really, really important.
This is really some great information, because last week we talked a lot about, even publishing books, you know what I mean, and in academic articles or journals. But I think this really helps out too for us to see another side of publishing, which is like the op-ed. Do you think there's a faster turnaround because I know it can take several months or sometimes a year or more to even get published in a journal. Do you think like doing something like
much quicker? Much quicker. Yeah. I mean, most publications will get back to you within 5 days.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, when you're submitting, because oftentimes, especially if it's timely, right? I mean, the big thing to write about now would be this critical race theory stuff that's been all in the news. I mean, that's a great idea. I don't know if any of you are doing research or you've been following this, but I was just having a conversation just yesterday with Nicole Hannah-Jones, who started the 1619 Project. And she and I were talking about this, and it was a forum, which is the reason why I have a book up there on the background. But we were talking about how there's been this enormous backlash across the country, where you have now states trying to ban books. I mean, this is some crazy stuff, right? We're banning books. They're trying to ban the 1619 Project. They're trying to somehow create legislation to keep kids from learning about aspects of slavery. So again, throughout history, we've always seen 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. There's always been this backlash that has taken place. And so it's very, very interesting. So you have to think about topics that are timely, like critical race theory, or, it doesn't have to be in education. I mean, I just read a really fascinating piece about what the appointment of the next, whoever she is, that's this next Black woman who's going to be on the Supreme Court, and how she's going to be the defining voice on issues around race, gender, equity in schools. I mean, it was just a fascinating, brilliant piece. And the reason why I got picked up was because it's timely, because of course, Joe Biden is now going through this process, which he said he's going to announce by the end of this month, which of course is very symbolic because it's Black History Month. He's going to announce who will be replacing Justice Breyer. So I think, you got to think about, again, what's going to pop, what's going to be timely, what's going to capture people's attention. And I think, you want to look to the news for that. And there's there's so much going on in the news right now. I mean, there's no shortage of that. But the turnaround time is generally 5 days.
Wow.
And it's very, very quick. Or sometimes you won't get any response. And because, again, you just think about it, a publication is receiving on any given day hundreds of commentaries, which is why I always tell students that, again, not only am I speaking to you, but I can be a resource for you. And sometimes that means that if you've written a really good piece, send it to me, and I can help shepherd it along, not only for diverse issues in higher education, but all of these editors at all of these other outlets are all my friends. So I can say, hey, I got a really great piece that doesn't really work for our publication, but I think it'd be great for you. And then they'll owe me a favor because I've given them a really wonderful piece. So again, I think the key is having allies who can support the work that you're doing, but who can also help shepherd you to publication, right? I always say that, education is wonderful, the things that we learn in class, but the real test is often how do we take that knowledge that we learned in class and then translate it to something that we get to put in the hands of our students to say, look, you've actually been published. So any student taking my class, the requirement is that they have to get published somewhere. Because again, I want them to leave our program with not only a degree, but a portfolio so that they can say, I've been in, and every student who's done well has been published, whether that's on CNN Online, whether that's Black Enterprise, but whatever, because I want them to have that experience.
Mhm. So I want to go back to something you said. So because you're offering to assist, it is definitely difficult, right, for someone to just, it's almost like a book when you have this great idea and you're trying to get it out there. But again, if you don't have somebody who can promote you, it's just kind of there. And so I'm thankful that you're offering to do that because, yeah, you can have the best idea in the world, but if you don't have someone to help kind of help push it along, it's just sitting on the table somewhere. And so
Yeah,
again,
and that's important. It's not just pushing along; it's also mentorship, right? Because
yeah.
and we do some of that, but we've got to do much more of it. I mean, the reason why I've been able to progress is because I had really good mentors. These were people who loved me and who cared for me. And not only did they love and care for me, they gave me critique and criticism, and they helped me to be better. And they also held me accountable, right? They said, if you want to be mentored by me, you got to do some homework, right? You can't, like, mentorship is like, you got to do some work, right? You can't just come and take all my knowledge and my experience. I want you to do this, this, and this, and this. And so I was always very intentional about making sure that I made my mentors proud because, again, they were taking time, right? And that's the worst thing in the world, to waste somebody's time. Um, and so sometimes I have mentors who I say to them, if you want to be mentored by me, these are my expectations, right? So if I tell you to redo your resume because it's not working, and you say, "Oh, I have time to do that. I'll do it like in 2 months." That's fine, but we can't enter into this relationship together because part of it requires that if I'm taking my time away from my family, right, to mentor you, then I also expect that you're going to bring the deliverables that, again, is going to make you successful. And so that's really important. Now, of course, things happen in life, but I think it's really important to engage in these relationships with a sense of seriousness. And it's really important, I think, to approach it from that way.
Now, quick question, like you were just saying about someone should really value time, and we should value time. So how much time then do you recommend, or how much time should someone devote to writing, for example? How much time do you think? 10 hours a week? I mean, to try to
I,
get published or
I think it depends on the goal. I mean, I write every day. I mean, and it depends on what's your process. For me, is in the morning. So I get up. I'm an early riser, so I write in the morning. Not always with the intention and goal that I'm going to publish something, but again, I mean, I'm trying to finish up a book now. But the key is that you're always writing because, again, like exercise, if you're not doing it, it becomes rusty, right? You just, it becomes in many ways stale. And so I think if you're serious about the craft, I think you do it every day. And the great thing about it is you can do this. You know, you don't need no machines to do it, right? You don't even need a computer. You can actually do it old fashioned and write. But I think it's really important to get in the habit of actually putting either pen to paper or fingers to keyboard and doing that on a regular basis. But again, I think, the process for getting published is such that it might require a couple of revisions, right? And so I would often get a piece that I thought was promising. I would give the person, and again, I worked a lot with academics. These were professors, graduate students, and I would give them feedback, and then they'd get mad and say, well, I don't want to make those changes. And I would say, okay, well, this is your work and you have the right to not want to make those changes. But I can tell you it's not going to get published unless you make these changes or fight back with me. We can have a sparring session where you can defend why you use this particular word or why you wrote it in this way. And certainly it became an exchange. So sometimes I stood corrected and I said, actually, I agree with your piece and your point of view. And I concede that you were indeed right. But again, I think the revision is a healthy process that allows people to be able to say, if you're open to it. And that's
Mhm.
the other thing. I mean, you all know because you're students, is that you've got to be open to that critique. Um, and open to the possibility that there could be another way. At the same time, if you really, really feel passionate about what you've written, I think it's also important to sometimes stay in your ground and say, thank you, but no thank you. I mean, I'm going through this in the process of this book that I'm trying to finish is because my editor wanted me to change some things to make it more sensational. And I just said, I'm not doing that, and for me, it was an issue around ethics and integrity where I just said, I'm not putting that in there. And then we fought. And then eventually, early on, I had to then decide whether or not I was going to stay with this publisher or go with another outlet. So sometimes these are based around moral and ethical choices. But I do think it's important for you, if you really feel passionate about it, to say, well, maybe this is the right home for my piece.
Now let me ask a question about that. Because you were talking about with your editor and whatnot. Did you get an editor first? Did you have the idea first, and then you kind of promoted your idea to different editors to see who would pick up your concept, or did you just get started with the book and then begin to kind of promote it to see who would be the editor? I mean, how did you do that?
So I started the idea of writing the book in my head, and so when I realized there was a book there, and that's the key. You got to make sure that there is actually a book there, because sometimes it could just be an idea floating around your head, but is there a real book? Then once I realized there was a book, I actually got an agent. And again, most people don't understand this process, right? It is very, very difficult to get an agent because, again, the agent doesn't know you, especially if you've never been a published author. I had an easier time because I was an editor of a publication, right? So people could know, okay, well, he edited, he could write, he knows what he's doing, kind of thing. So I then got an agent. And the agent is a person who, once you have a book proposal, right? So the idea goes down to the paper that you're now pitching this idea for a book. He then will sell your proposal, your book proposal. And so my agent, who was based in California, then sold my book idea, which was great for me because then I got a check, which was a cash advance on my book. And so the way it works is generally you have to pay back that advance once there are book sales. So if you get, $50,000, your first $50,000 in book sales will basically pay that back. And then after that, you start making profits on your book. Most people don't really make profits on books. I mean, that's the other thing is books are not very profitable unless you are a Stephen King or you're what's that woman who wrote the Harry Potter book? Now they're selling millions and millions of books. Most people are not making money off of book publishing because, again, especially if you get an advance. So you get an advance, you're like, okay, I got $50,000. Oh, woo. Then you realize, wait a minute, you got to pay that money back. I mean, not pay it back, but it just gets taken from you. And so the key is you have to have an idea that people think will resonate. So my book is a biography on Reverend Al Sharpton, who I think will sell when it comes out because he's all over the place. He is, people are interested in him. Some people will buy the book because they like him. Some people will buy the book because they don't like him. And so there's a market there. But it's been a difficult book to write because it is hard to write a book or a biography on a person who is living because they keep doing stuff. Right? I mean, like I thought the book was going to be done after Trayvon Martin, and then George Floyd happened, and then my agent said, "Well, you got to write another chapter about George Floyd because Reverend Sharpton's preaching the eulogy there." And so then I had to get on a plane, fly to Minnesota, and then so there's always something. If you're writing about a subject that has died, at least there is some degree of finality, and you can know that this is the course of the life and this is what happened. Somebody like a Reverend Sharpton is only 67 years old. So, he keeps doing stuff. And
Mhm.
so it almost makes it feel like whatever the book is out, it will be incomplete. There'll be a need to go back. And so that's the problem. At some point, you have to say, I need to just finish this thing because it's almost like writing a dissertation or writing a master's thesis. You just got to say, I got to finish this. If not, I'll be writing this thing forever.
Yeah, because how long have you been working on this project?
Too long for at least 13 years.
What?
For at least 13 years. Yeah, yeah. Because again, it's hard to write about a living person. It just really, really is.
Mm.
And so, Reverend Sharpton and I, of course, have become we talk every day. Because and he jokes and says that I've become his therapist because when you're a biographer of someone, you literally know everything about their life. And so I probably know him better in many ways than his kids. I know that sounds weird, but it's true because kids, they have a very kind of very siloed view of their parents, right? Because they see their parents, right? They love their parents, or maybe they don't like their parents, but there's a very kind of narrow view of it. So I've literally been with Reverend Sharpton all over the world. To Africa with him, to Europe with him, to his house. Literally everywhere, and have talked to like 279 people for this book.
Wow.
So I have a very different take than his kids would, who just see him as, oh, that's my dad who's a civil rights leader,
Mm-hmm.
and I love my dad. Rather, I see him as a dad who's a civil rights leader, but I also see him in a different context. Because I see how when he's on airplanes, people respond to him. I see, I'm just like a fly on the wall, and I just record all of that. So yeah, it's been a long time. So I'm kind of ready for the book to be done.
Wow. Well, we have a question from Dr. Sakai.
Good evening, everyone. So my question is about strategy. So I was curious to know how long you've been working on the book as well, because obviously that's not a great strategy for getting tenure, right? Because the clock would have come and gone.
Yeah.
But it might work in journalism, perhaps because there's a different requirement in terms of publication. So just tell me about how you strategize. So ideally, so you talked about like making sure you had a good idea and then pursuing the book, but sometimes the strategy is about like I'm publishing for a particular journal, or I am, trying to get in on this topic because it's relevant and also connected to my work or whatever the case. I just struggled. I am a tenured person, but in moving up to the next level, I'm just trying to strategize about how to make things work. I wake up and look at my email and it's already on fire before I've gotten a chance to do that, intentional writing that I said I was going to do every day when I first wake up. And, things need immediate responses and it's already there. And so fortunately, I hope anyway that I get to take sabbatical soon so that I can focus. And so we just say a little bit about strategy. So I know we have some students on the call, some faculty on the call, but just in terms of strategy on how to, approach the whole publication process.
I think it's really tough. One, because I think that when COVID happened, there was this sense that we all had more time that we could devote to this. But the problem is that our lives got filled up with other forms of anxiety. And I think this whole issue of anxiety and stress is real, right, in our lives. And I think it's also important for us to acknowledge that. I know that some of the things that colleges and universities have started to do with their faculty, which I think has been really great, is to pause the tenure clock. Because again, people were just burned out, right? This whole expectation that you were going to be writing so that you could come up for promotion, I think was really difficult. And there were people who were faculty members who were having to take care of their parents, their children, and it became just really stressful. And our students, right? Many of our students who are our parents as well. I have an 8-year-old son. Luckily, my wife was able to be a stay-at-home mom, so she was able to tend to our son, and she was a former teacher. which I felt sorry for that boy at home when the COVID started, because she was probably worse than most of his teachers. But it allowed me to be able to just come into my little office here and focus on stuff like that. But we were privileged in that way. Most people probably didn't have that luxury, right? I'm just thinking about folks who had service level jobs who had to go out and work. So again, I think, my recommendation would be that there could be some time, even if it's 10 minutes or 15 minutes, to carve out to just write. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect form. It can even be free writing. Some of us get the best ideas when we're in the bed, right? And people often talk about having a kind of pad next to their bed on the nightstand. They jot it down so they don't forget. I mean, certainly, that's one. That's what I just feel like I'm not whole or complete if I don't get up and at least write for an hour. That's me. Like some people do that, say that when they're talking about exercise, right? If they don't exercise, they just feel out of whack. I have to write. And again, for me, it's not the email stuff, although we can almost occupy writing with emails because, our students are emailing us. Where all of these committees, outside people are asking to do stuff. But to me, it's like, how do you take time to push one of your projects forward? And that's where I think you have to be very intentional about putting that space aside. And then you might have to carve something else out, right? I mean, it's just like everything else in the world. Maybe that means 20 minutes less of watching your favorite show, or your podcast, whatever, so that you can get that done. And I think the great thing about writing under pressure is that there is this sense that you have to produce in order to get either something, whether that is tenure, the book, or whether that is your diploma, because you have to write. My students sometimes say to me, "Well, I don't know where to begin." I say, "Just begin." Just like what Nike would say, just do it. And then once you have something, then we can talk about how to make that better. But again, a lot of it is just the fear of actually starting, right? I mean, so those of us who are writers, many of us fear math. Like statistics was something that just scared me. Math scared me. And I find that many of my students are afraid to write, but then when they actually start writing, they love it, because either somebody told them a long time ago, you're not a good writer, or they just didn't have the confidence to believe that they could write. And then they actually write it, and then they realize that they're actually very, very good. And also, I would say that I think of writing almost like putting together a puzzle, right? So you think about a big jigsaw puzzle, and there are all these pieces there. And so the fun part for me is when I have it all down, to start connecting all the pieces, and then you're like weaving together something that's very, very nice. And it's a skill that I think you'll always have forever. So even if I stop being a journalist, which I can't ever stop being a journalist because it's part of my DNA, I still will know how to write. So I'll still know how to freelance an article or write a piece, a magazine piece, and it just never goes away. It's one of those skills that you'll always have forever, which is quite nice.
Thank you.
We have about, what's this, maybe 17 minutes or so. Anyone else? Miracle, Dr. Ampar, is it Majida? Do any of you have any questions you would like to ask Dr. Watson?
I mean, I would also recommend for those of you who get an internship, if you're interested in publishing, and it doesn't have to be at like a news outlet, it could be at a publishing house, but I think, or it could be, with a think tank where you could be able to do some writing and some publishing. I think that's really, really important. I know, again, in this space that we're in, where everything is virtual, or most things are virtual, but if you can get that, I think is really, really important. Mm-hmm. I think we have a question. Yes.
Yes. Can you tell me what's your thoughts on the white papers? You know,
On the what?
white papers. I'm, I,
What is that?
it, was with Bertha Group. We're doing research, and they publish it within the organization.
Oh, white
but
papers.
It's not white papers. Yes.
Yeah. So again, my understanding, and I'm not an expert on white papers at all, but my understanding that white papers are often like policy kind of papers that are often put forth, sometimes to test ideas, right, and theories and things like that. And you see a lot of people, and particularly organizations putting forth white papers, right, almost as kind of guides to suggest what we should be doing, like policy recommendations and things like that. I think so much of what is published, though, is not really read by most people, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons why you think about Medium. I don't know if any of you use Medium, but Medium has become really, really important because Medium, you can self-publish your stuff, right? And people are like, well, who's going to self-publish? Because who's going to read it? People are self-publishing their own works because, again, it's so competitive to get it published in like a mainstream publication. So you just go on Medium and you create an account. And then again, people are using social media to push out their ideas. In the same way that so many people are self-publishing their books and stuff. It used to be like my old way of going and getting an agent and selling a book to a publishing house. Now people are just going and they're publishing their own books. And sometimes they're becoming overnight successes because, again, we live in this very fast-paced society where you have people making videos and putting them on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok and all of this stuff, and they've become famous. I mean, literally famous. I don't know how, but they're like getting advertising support for little videos and stuff like that. So I think this whole idea of self-publishing is something that is very, very interesting, and I think it's just going to continue to grow. The idea is that you can almost be in control of your own work. You don't actually have to turn it over to somebody else. And I think that social media is allowing people to really do that. I mean, you can create videos now and edit videos on your phone. Like, we could never do that before. You would have to have like one of those old big camera, like, like a studio. People don't have studio. Like, you don't have to do any of that stuff anymore. It is very, very interesting. So one of the things I teach my students is that I'm training you not only to become a good writer, but I'm training you to become a multimedia journalist, because you need to learn how to do video. You need to learn how to take pictures. You need to learn how to write. You need to learn how to edit. You need to learn how to do everything. You need to learn how to design. You need to know a little bit about advertising. Because the old way of just writing for a publication, like a newspaper or a magazine, those days are over, right? I mean, do any of you subscribe to an actual newspaper that comes to your house? I thought at least one person would say, yeah. I don't know when I get the newspapers wrapped up outside of my house. And everybody's looking at me like, you can just read that online, right? And I'm like, yeah, but I like the way it feels. I like to read the Washington Post and open it, and they're like, but you don't need to do that. You can just read it online.
That's okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but I'm just going to say it just changes. Our whole society and culture is shifting and changing. So
I agree with you that it's shifting, but I don't know if it's schools of education or higher ed in general, but they're very conservative. So I would love to be able to just self-publish and write and whatever, but that is literally the opposite of what will get you promoted. And so I really would love to be able to, at the same time, bring along higher ed to present day. I mean, so, there's always even the controversy in higher ed, how everybody else is learning what we can do virtually. And higher ed is trying to push back the campus because we can't bear, something that's so non-traditional and so unfamiliar for us.
But we're starting to see the rules relaxed a little bit, even about what would be considered, right, an academic piece, right? Or, I remember a couple of years ago, Chronicle of Higher Education did a big series of stories about almost kind of making fun of students who were writing like their dissertations on hip hop and stuff, like almost, and like, this is not real academic stuff. And then they almost had to apologize because there was so much backlash where people were like, no, hip hop is a serious scholarship. Like, it can really be. And so, I think it's starting to shift and change where, again, a lot of academics are writing kind of, things that would traditionally not be considered scholarly,
Right.
But again, I agree with you. I think a lot of them also are either like tenured professor, associate professors going up for full or something like that. So I think it's a little different from, say, an assistant professor who's trying to get. And also, I think it depends upon the institution that you're at as well.
Yeah, for sure. And also, I had no idea that Black issues became diverse issues. No idea. I just thought Black issues went away because I also relied on that in the early 90s when you first start looking for a job.
Yeah.
Just had no idea. I just thought it was out. So I would absolutely.
We changed our name. And
nice.
Yeah. And again, it was also very contentious because, again, to this day, I'll go to a scholarly conference and I'm on a panel and someone will pull me over to the side and say, "Excuse me, sir, can you come here? I'm mad at you because you all changed your name from Black Issues and Diverse." I'm like, I have nothing to do with that. But people really loved the whole idea that there was a space just for Black academicians and students. And they just felt that once you change the name, it kind of, I think about it a little differently. I think that you can still, nobody who reads diverse issues in higher education doesn't feel that our coverage of Black people is missing. But it's also been nice to expand beyond just writing about Black faculty and Black students, to also think about the intersection of, of other populations and demographics. But our founders who started Black Issues in higher education, they're still active, and in fact, it's a wonderful thing to work for a publication that's family owned. So there were two families, and they've since retired, but their kids are now keeping the publication going. So,
and it's just a personal plug. Will you take an intern? Because we do have doctoral interns, and some of whom might be interested in.
We do. We take about 4 interns a summer, and also from a year. And the key is we actually pay our interns. We don't believe that people should work for free, and so we actually pay our interns a stipend, and we train our interns to actually get published, and to also show them different aspects. In fact, part of my job, my role is to help recruit and to provide coaching for our interns that we're bringing. And we actually prefer, I know I shouldn't say this, but we actually prefer graduate students sometimes, because again, there's a seriousness sometimes that is missing with other students. I teach graduate students, so I love graduate students. Yeah. Any other questions? So I would give you all my my address, email address, and what I would recommend is if you have an idea, feel free to send me your idea, and also if you have a piece that you think is worthy of getting published. And I'm pretty good on email, and my email address at Diverse is really simple. It's J Watson, WATSON, J Watson, the number 1 at diverseeducation.com, jwatson1 at diverseeducation.com. So if you have an idea or you want to talk through, like, oh, I'm thinking about this, I want to write about this, send me an email, and I'm pretty good at responding and giving some feedback on a particular piece. If you have an idea that you think may not work for Diverse, but you're interested in publishing it somewhere else, please, again, tap my brain for resources. I'm happy to be a connector and to introduce you, facilitate an introduction with someone else. So I think that's really important. And I think we have to do more of that to help each other. So that's one thing that I can certainly offer, and would be happy to receive, any pitches or ideas that you all have. And I know there's some, like I was speaking to a professor at University of Maryland, Baltimore County recently. He was telling me that he requires that his doctoral students all write an op-ed piece by the end of the semester, and get published. And so I hope that more professors think about that as a tactic and strategy, because again, I just think it's important to have stuff in your portfolio that you can share with others.
Yeah, it really is. And one last question, Dr. Watson. When you first started, you talked about making research more accessible to everyone. Was there anything else you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, just again, I think, how do you take an idea and then connect it to what's happening in contemporary society? Because again, for our publication, yes, we have professors and we have deans and we have presidents who read our publication, but we also have a lot of people on the Hill, right? Like policy directors, legislative government affairs people who want to know what's trending in higher education, right? Or what's trending in K through 12, because we do some stuff around K through 12, because we think there's a link, of course, between K through 12 and higher ed. So again, the key is how do you write in a way where you're using language that, again, people, and I know we're trained, right, as academics to sometimes write in a very, very particular kind of way. And I think the key is learning how to do both, right? How to kind of really show off your expertise and your language towards your field, but also to how do you broaden that to make it, that's what I call more accessible, so that, like, because sometimes I'm reading stuff and I'm like, listen, I have a PhD, but this stuff I'm confused about. And I think that's where it becomes a bit tricky, right? Where if I can't get through it and I'm just like, this is just too dense, then I think that you're going to lose a whole bunch of people where your message could really resonate. And I don't think that takes away from your scholarship. Like, I don't think you have to use like a whole bunch of big words sometimes. I think sometimes you can make it like Malcolm X would say, keep it plain, right? So that people can say, okay, I get what you're saying. I'm following your train of thought here. It makes sense to me. But I think sometimes it's just so obscure. You all know what I'm talking about. You've read this stuff. It's just so obscure. It's just so difficult and dense that you're like, I don't want to read this. And I, as a professor, I don't like to assign my graduate students that stuff, because I think, again, I want them to be able to read a piece, be moved by it, to understand and comprehend it, and then be forced, in a way to respond to it. And it's hard to do. And that doesn't mean that everything has to be easy. I mean, we should be struggling with some stuff. I'm not suggesting that, you read some of Foucault, you're going to struggle through some of that stuff. I mean, I think struggling is okay, but I don't think you have to struggle through all of it all the time, if that makes sense. And I think some of it is just, I think we have to just be very intentional about the word choice that we use and the ways in which we communicate.
Well, any last minute questions at all? Well, Dr. Watson, I want to thank you so much.
No, of course, this was fun. Thank you.
I'm like, yo, go ahead. You have some extra copies of the 1619. You can just, I can meet you somewhere and then I can pass them out.
Let me tell you, if you all haven't read that though, do read her. And Nicole Hennon, I think she's made, again, one of the things we were talking about yesterday was how some people are saying she shouldn't be a part of the conversation because she's not a trained historian. You know what I mean? I mean, and she was telling me about how she was inspired by Lerone Bennett Jr., who wrote, of course, Lerone Bennett Jr. wrote that famous book called Before the Mayflower. But Lerone Bennett Jr. was an editor at Ebony magazine, and he wasn't formally a trained historian. I mean, within our tradition, there have always been folks who have been trained formally, and then those who have kind of, almost been self-taught, but we've valued both of those kind of, contributions to understanding our history and our culture. So I just think she's amazing that she's forced the country in many ways to grapple with this issue of slavery, which we don't want to deal with at all.
No, we really don't. At all.
Well, thank you all for for all you do, and good luck. And I look forward to getting some of your pitches soon.
Indeed. Dr. Ampar, did you have anything to say? She's our new chair.
No, thank you so much for joining us. This was fabulous. I have a couple of 7-year-olds running around. That's why I had to keep turning my video off, but I listened fully, and thank you so much for joining us and giving us such a great talk. It's always good to hear about that, what we don't consider the traditional aspects of academia, and exposing our students to the ideas of writing op-eds and writing newspaper articles. So thank you so much for doing that, and I hope you get some good pitches.
You're welcome anytime. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope so too. I hope we have some good pitches that come from this. America, you've been quiet. Well, I hope you're the one with the pitch idea.
Thank you so much. I learned a lot from this.
Okay. All righty. Well, thank you all.
Wonderful.
And excellent. And we'll certainly be in touch soon.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And keep your eyes on the email for the next workshop. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.